listener production.
Hi, Natarsha Belling with you and welcome to the afternoon edition of The Briefing. The latest poll shows the coalition is set to suffer its worst election defeat in almost 80 years on Saturday, and the blame game has already begun. If the polls are right and Labor wins with an increased majority this weekend, where did the coalition go so horribly wrong? It comes as new bombshell allegations emerge that the Liberals hired a key Trump strategist to help with their election campaign here in Australia. We're joined by Tom McIlroy, The Guardian's chief political correspondent, who broke the story on Mr Trump's campaign strategist visiting Australia. But first, let's check the afternoon headlines this Thursday, the 1st of May. The Prime Minister has hit back at questions over the father of one of Labor's candidates in a key marginal seat. Bennelong Labor candidate Jerome Laxall's father was caught on camera making homophobic comments to a Liberal volunteer at a polling booth. Mr Albanese had these comments when asked by a journalist if he would speak with Mr Laxall over the matter.
You want me to speak to people about their family? I keep families out.
But do you think it's appropriate? But do you think it's appropriate?
I've answered your question. If you yell, it doesn't mean you get a different answer.
But is it appropriate for a Labor candidate?
That's the way we work. What? Someone's family member. I don't talk about people's family. I don't like people talking about mine. I don't talk about others. I don't talk about Peter Dutton's family.
Mr Laxall has apologised over his father's comments, saying they were deeply offensive and completely unacceptable. Meantime, the opposition leader has been in Brisbane as a new YouGov poll shows Labor is set to win on Saturday with an increased majority of 84 seats, which would be its worst election defeat since 1946. Mr Dutton maintains he can win, telling reporters the only thing he'd change about his campaign is calling out Labor's lies earlier.
Why would you reward a Prime Minister who hasn't been honest with you? Why would you reward a Prime Minister when no Australian at the moment can say that they're better off?
And Erin Patterson's estranged husband is in the witness box today as her murder trial continues in regional Victoria. The court has seen a text exchange between the former couple where he told her he felt, quote, too uncomfortable to attend the lunch with his parents and other relatives. Miss Patterson's facing 3 murder charges and 1 of attempted murder for allegedly feeding her guests a beef Wellington meal with poisonous mushrooms in 2023. She has pleaded not guilty. Now it's time to get into our deep dive with Tom McIlroy, The Guardian's chief political correspondent, on how Peter Dutton's election campaign went so horribly wrong and why they allegedly used a Donald Trump strategist to help build their fight to win government here in Australia. Tom, thanks so much for joining us. You broke this story this morning regarding a key Trump strategist, Donald Trump I'm talking about, actually helping the coalition allegedly with their election campaign here in Australia. Can you explain what you uncovered?
Yeah, Chris LaSavita, who was the co-chair of Donald Trump's successful 2024 election campaign, said in a recorded conversation that he'd been here in Australia just before the election campaign started and had given advice to the Liberal Party about structural issues related to Peter Dutton. The Liberal Party say that that didn't happen. They say that he hasn't advised their campaign, but it's fascinating to see another potential link between the Peter Dutton campaign for Prime Ministership on May 3 and Donald Trump's administration in Washington.
So, Tom, I also interviewed Senator Michaelia Cash on 7 earlier today. She echoed those statements from the coalition, denying this strategist was involved in the Liberal campaign. Do you stand by the story?
Oh, yeah, we stand by the story. There's no question of that. The coalition campaign said to us that Mr. LaSavita is not advising them, has never advised them, is not involved in the coalition campaign in any way, and has not met with Peter Dutton. But Chris LaSavita, who, as we know, is very close to Donald Trump, says that he's looking forward to meeting Peter Dutton when he becomes Prime Minister, if he becomes Prime Minister after the election on Saturday. And the question is, how close was he to Liberal Party figures and exactly what kind of work was he doing here in Australia. He told us, as we were reporting this story out, that he has business clients in Australia and that it's not unusual for him to be doing international work. And certainly in my experience, it's not unusual at all for overseas strategists and political types to visit campaigns here in Australia, to be involved in different ways, usually left of centre parties overseas, strategists connected with those parties will advise left of centre parties here in Australia, and the same thing on the right side of politics.
So, Tom, this strategist was even recorded actually saying, I understand he didn't know he was being recorded at the time, saying that he was in Australia helping the Liberal Party. Why would the coalition come out and deny that?
There's possibly some ambiguity between the statements of Chris Lasavita and the coalition campaign here. We learned about the investigation that was going on, these undercover reporters working in Europe from Collective, a German-based organisation, and from another organisation doing some undercover work. They spoke to Chris Lasavita, and it was in the context of a broader story that he made these comments about Australia. We followed up the tip off. We satisfied ourselves that the footage was authentic and that the strong public interest in reporting what he said about Australia was satisfied. It's interesting that he mentioned Peter Dutton in particular. Obviously, we're only a couple of days away from the election. And the question of links between the coalition campaign, Peter Dutton's push to become PM, and Donald Trump have really dogged them throughout this campaign. So that's why we decided this was an important story.
Tom, I'm glad you mentioned that, because it seems from the start of the campaign, with the success of Donald Trump winning the US election, the coalition had thought, okay, let's kind of mark our campaign like Donald Trump did. That worked for them initially, and then literally everything went, the train off the tracks when the chaos started with Donald Trump and the tariffs.
Yeah, the tariffs really changed everything. Liberation Day, as Donald Trump called it, was a turning point, I think, for our campaign, even though Donald Trump is not a player in Australian politics directly. Peter Dutton's strategy had been to present a kind of hard man, tough guy, right of centre politics presentation to Australian voters, and he was planning a campaign along those lines similar to the one that Donald Trump had run in the United States. When Liberation Day comes along and the public start to question the strategy that Donald Trump is implementing with these trade tariffs affecting countries all around the world, including Australia, the politics really started to turn. I think Labor, the Albanese government, saw an opportunity here to try and put pressure on Peter Dutton. They amped up criticism of him about the Americanisation of his policies, things like broad cuts to the federal public service, changes to education, a Department of Government efficiency along the lines of what Elon Musk is running in Washington. And they think they're on a winner with that. They think voters are not supportive of Trump-style politics in Australia, and they're trying to tie Peter Dutton to that very carefully.
Tom, it's quite extraordinary to look at how this campaign, if we believe the polls, because the latest polls show that Labor will win government now with a majority, and the coalition could suffer its worst election defeat in almost 80 years. My question to you is, how did this go so horribly wrong? Of course, the Trump tariffs were a massive factor, but do you think the working from home policy was a massive blunder?
Yeah, I think any assessment of it is very negative. I've never seen an election policy be withdrawn during a campaign and for a leader to come out and apologise and say they got it wrong. I think the Liberal Party believed that criticism of public servants working from home perceived to be slacking off would play well with voters who are working hard and struggling to make their family budget stack up every week. But instead, Labor successfully exploited that policy to make voters concerned that their own work from home rights in the private sector, away from the federal public service, would be infringed by a Dutton government. It went really well for Labor and poorly for the opposition, right to the point where Peter Dutton made a decision to ditch the policy. I think that's one blunder that we've seen in this campaign. I think there have been other significant ones as well. And the question that existed before the campaign started of whether Peter Dutton had done enough policy work, had faced the media enough to be match fit for a grueling 5-week campaign is really bearing out. If the result is what we expect on Saturday night, it will be one thing that the coalition will have to look back on. Did they get the policy settings right? Were they ready to go for a campaign of this intensity?
Many would say it's quite extraordinary because, which is a line the coalition have tried to push quite hard, is are you better now than what you were 3 years ago, better off? And that we have had a cost of living crisis. There have been a dramatic increase in supermarket costs, in the cost of petrol, in power bills, and the majority of Australians at the start of the election campaign were putting blame squarely at the Albanese government. Yet a number of weeks into the campaign, it looks like Labor is going to win. That has to be seen as an extraordinary failure in policies from the coalition.
Yeah, John Howard used to say that the times would suit him. And I think we're starting to see that the times are suiting Anthony Albanese. He got lucky with this shift in the Trump situation that we've already discussed. And I think the effort to bring down inflation and to convince voters that Labor is better at helping them with cost of living pain has come good at just the right time. That in parallel with a bumpy, sometimes chaotic campaign from the coalition looks like it's going to give Labor a very good chance of holding on to government. And the question then could be, will Anthony Albanese be able to get a parliamentary majority to keep a majority government situation, or will he go into minority when he would have to govern with the support of crossbenchers? I think if he gets a majority, he will be viewed as a Labor hero. I think the government won't believe their luck if they can do that. Historically, since about the Second World War, first-term governments in Australia go backwards when they stand for re-election the first time. Labor doesn't have much room to give because they've got such a slim majority now. If Anthony Albanese can win new seats and hold on to majority government, it'll be a significant, significant victory.
Tom, there were also, from the other side of the argument, if you look at the Albanese government, as I mentioned before, cost of living crisis, they initially promised to bring down our power bills by $275. They promised to crack down on the supermarkets. We had an ACCC investigation, probably costing taxpayers hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not millions of dollars, but still no crackdown on the huge price increases at supermarkets. The majority of Australians I've heard interviewed basically say with Mr Albanese and Mr Dutton, it's the devil you know and the devil you don't, that it's not really a win for Labor, but it's actually a vote against the coalition.
Yeah, the conventional wisdom in politics is that oppositions don't win elections, governments lose them. And I think that was the case in 2022. Scott Morrison was very unpopular, and it gave Anthony Albanese, who isn't really a dynamic campaigner or a particularly charismatic leader, the opportunity to become Prime Minister and replace an unpopular predecessor. We might be seeing the flip side of that here, that the coalition have not been able to convince voters that they're ready for another shot at government. So a somewhat unimpressive offering from Labor with some nicks and cuts of their own is still enough to get them over the line. Of course, we're forecasting into the future. It could be that there's a surprise result. Generally, where we're looking with the polls, it looks like it's going to be Labor in the box seat.
And Tom, finally, we know there's been lots of chaos in America, especially with tariffs. We don't know what the future may bring. How do you think Australians will feel after Saturday if the Labor government does get in? Do you think we will have great leadership? Do you think we will see Mr Chalmers become the new Prime Minister? And thirdly, do you think Australians will be better off? Do you think there will be any immediate cost of living relief?
The government says that inflation will continue to come down under them, and that household assistance will continue, and that they're better placed to give that to households than the coalition. So that's potentially one area where people would feel better off. I think the other message that we might be able to take away from this campaign is that voters prefer the stability of the leader that they know, Anthony Albanese, to the question marks that are hanging over Peter Dutton and his campaign. Consider relations with the United States. I think they would back Anthony Albanese to approach the US President Donald Trump and seek a better deal on tariffs and other important trade and security implications for Australia from the United States, more than they would trust Peter Dutton to do that. It's going to be very difficult, and I suspect Labor will find a second term, if they are successful, more difficult than the first. Whether that means Anthony Albanese doesn't serve out the full term is an open question. I think if he wins a majority, he'll have a strong claim to serve out a full term. If it's a minority result, I think he'll come under real pressure.
Watch this space. We appreciate your analysis this afternoon. Thanks so much, Tom.
Great to be with you. Thanks a lot.
That was Tom McIlroy, The Guardian's chief political correspondent. And that's it for this episode of the afternoon edition of The Briefing. We'd love you to subscribe or follow us so you don't miss our episodes or our deep dive of the day. You can also follow us on our socials, on Instagram at The Briefing Podcast and on TikTok and YouTube. You just need to search The Listener Newsroom, which is LISTNR. And we'll be back in your feed tomorrow morning at 6 a.m. I'm Natarsha Belling. Thanks for your company. See you then.